Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call it when your stuff gets stolen, but the guy that did it is nowhere to be found?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Thief gone. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Look, not my finest, okay, but it did mash up both titles.
Well, let's just hope it doesn't happen to us while we're on our trip.
That is the dream.
Yeah.
You mean while we're currently on the trip right now?
Yes, so hopefully it has not happened, and it will not happen. Hence, while we're on the trip.
I gotcha. Folks, thanks for tuning in on this Talk This is in Japan episode of Talk This. Are we literally in Japan right now? Well, we're in a Japan state of mind.
Yeah.
And isn't that just about the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much.
But this week on the show, we're going to be talking about Thief, and we're going to be talking about maybe our most current game ever on the podcast, right?
Yeah, I just put this in the list, so.
Days Gone. I really think because, I mean, it's not quite as current as this episode is being released, but it's, been released within a month. Which I don't think we've ever talked about anything quite that up-to-date before.
We might have. I probably, if we looked back throughout our whole catalog, we might find something.
Talk This super fans, let us know if you can think of a time when we talked about something that was more on the pulse of gaming than Days Gone is right now.
Yeah. Well, we should probably apologize ahead of time if there's been any big discourse about Days Gone in the last, week or so. We probably won't be talking about it.
Only, of course, because we're enjoying Japan and haven't been on social media much, right, Emma?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I'm sure the discourse is just, there were a bunch more patches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy how they've released 30 patches in 2 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Too bad that we aren't on the cutting edge of that.
We're starting with our old game, though, so.
They haven't literally, that was a joke. They haven't.
I know that was a joke.
Because, anyway, I was trying to make time jokes. Because that's one of our specialties on Talk This. And it didn't work.
Jokes or time? Because I think both of those are wrong.
Jokes about time. Jokes about it being Sunday at noon.
Right, of course.
So let's talk about Thief.
Deadly Shadows.
It's not Deadly Shadows. It's the first one is The Dark Project. Did you read?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I read about The Dark Project. It's just I have all the Thief games open on my website, and I just picked one.
Deadly Shadows is the third one.
I apologize.
It does still technically fall into our old game category, so I can give you a pass.
We're talking about The Dark Project. Excuse me.
I mean, we can talk about all of them, but I only really know the plot details on The Dark Project, so.
Last time on our full episode, we talked about the origins of the JRPG, and now we're talking about the origins of the stealth game. A much less ubiquitous genre, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, right now it feels very apropos to me because what I was trying to do before we left for Japan was to try to get as far into Assassin's Creed as possible. Which is sort of Thief is sort of a forerunner of Assassin's Creed and its ilk. Although reading about this made me, and I was just earlier today talking about how Assassin's Creed really fails in the stealth aspect. At least I'm literally playing Assassin's Creed, so I'm willing to admit they've probably fixed this a little in the intervening years. But even just reading about Thief, which is older than Assassin's Creed by, at least 7 or 8 years. More than that, I think. Because I'm playing Assassin's Creed on the PS3, so it has to be relatively new.
Is 2007 was this the first Assassin's Creed? 2006?
I do not know. Regardless, does fall into that sort of 7 or 8 year gap. And Thief seems to have more nuanced stealth mechanics than at least I am utilizing in Assassin's Creed, so.
Yeah, I say, there are sure a lot of games that have stealth elements nowadays, but I can't really think of a game where I'm like, oh yeah, you're supposed to always be stealthy. You know? Maybe Dishonored if you're playing it that way. Well, but I can't think of anything like specifically that's like stealth.
Let's lay the groundwork here. Let's lay the groundwork here a little bit. So Thief is a Thief the Dark Project is a 1998 game from Looking Glass Studios, who we talked about BioShock just a couple weeks ago. And Looking Glass is made up by a bunch of the guys who eventually went on to make BioShock, right? Ken Levine and same dudes. I think most of them sort of left before Thief was finished, but still they were kind of involved in the coming up with the idea for the game. So I thought that was interesting that we were talking about sort of two games by very similar people relatively close together. So it was originally the first two games by Looking Glass Studios, and then a bunch of those employees moved to Ion Storm, and they did a reboot in 2014 that's from Eidos Montreal, which is published by Square Enix, because this podcast is about Square Enix and Square Enix only.
It's hard to avoid, honestly.
This is the only publisher we discuss.
Yes. The first Thief's games were published by Eidos, though, so
yes, that's true.
There is that.
Technically,
connection.
We are not talking about the Square Enix one today, but, you know, they're still our overlords, basically. Anyway, you play in Thief as a guy named Garrett. Like many thieves, you were a homeless orphan until you got taken in by the thieves.
Garrett is such a homeless orphan name.
Is it really?
You know?
I think of Garrett as being like, you wear a polo and you own a yacht. Or rather, your dad owns a yacht.
See, I don't think of Garrett as, like, a modern name. I feel like if I met a Garrett nowadays, I'd be like, did you come from Dickensian England?
Really? I don't know. I think I just have a completely different impression of the name Garrett, because I think, like, he's in Alpha Gamma Nu, and that's Nu sounds like
I don't know where I got my
but
impressions of the name Garrett, but it's just very much like homeless orphan on the rough side of the streets to me. I don't know.
Well, evidently you got it from Thief, because you're a homeless orphan, you, like, try to pickpocket a guy who turns out to be, like, a thief dude, or something.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Who teaches you his ways, and eventually you sort of leave the, like, thief guild, kind of. I don't know, I didn't read up too much on the lore. But you become a thief, and basically, you pull off this, like, really cool thievery exploit. I'm saying the word thief a lot, not really on purpose, but mostly because it sounds cooler than stealing exploit. Thievery exploit, much better. That gets you this job opportunity that's offered to you by a woman named Victoria, she's a representative of, like, some rich guy who's impressed by your thieving work, and she gives you, a job to steal a sword from this man named Constantine, and so you do steal it, and it turns out Constantine had you steal his own sword so he could, like, test you, which probably right off the bat should have worried you about working with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That probably should have been a red flag, like having a thievery test. But anyway, Constantine gives you this job to steal the Eye, which is a gem that's kept in a sealed cathedral, and it's sealed because there's this, like, prophecy that the trickster is going to steal it.
Yeah, there's some very creative names in Thief.
Well, I was just thinking that sounded a lot like the Phantom Thieves are going to show up, but...
I know, that does sound like the Phantom Thieves, but I just like that, like, the main location is called the City. And of course, like, the gemstone, like, you know, the Eye is slightly, creative. It's not, at least not called, like, the gem, but it's still... a little bit like, yeah, you put a lot of thought into this title, didn't you?
Anyway, you have to get these 4 talismans to unlock the cathedral, so you do a lot of sneaking around, you get the talismans, you unlock the cathedral, you bring the Eye back to Constantine, and oh no! Constantine is the trickster. Probably should have guessed that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got the Eye, but for the Eye to work, not really, I was a little unclear on what the Eye does, but probably something bad, right? But for the Eye to work, it needs a flesh eye, also.
Of course.
So Victoria takes your eye, and basically, eventually, Garrett is able to replace not only his eye with a mechanical eye, but to replace the eye with a copy that kills the trickster. And then we move on to the next game.
Mm-hmm.
So, some good thievery going on. And there's
also
zombies.
A shocking amount of supernatural creatures.
There are zombies, too. I forgot about the zombies, yeah.
Yeah.
Another reason that the cathedral was sealed is because there are evidently zombies inside. And various monsters.
You know, that's why you shouldn't go in the crypt when the dead are being raised.
Gee, what other relevant, like, that's so old now. Where are we now? I'm trying to think of where we're at in this cycle. Tonight is the penultimate episode, right? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
No, that's not even right. Tonight is the last episode.
My point still stands.
This is the last episode, so it's good that you made a Game of Thrones reference. Although, probably just even by saying that, you've spoiled something.
Yeah, Madelyn, I was trying to subtweet it, okay? You didn't have to...
Yeah, okay. It was a bad subtweet. A little too on the nose.
When I was looking at it and, like, looking at the gameplay and stuff, I feel like they took a lot of this out in the sequel, the zombies.
Yeah, it's less...
just because it doesn't seem like it fits whatsoever with what is going on, gameplay-wise.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise we're in this sort of steampunk, the city, and it's like, where did these zombies come from?
Yeah. But it's not even, like, the setting. Like, I was watching some gameplay of it, and the zombies can just, like, rush you at points. Like, they'll just be, like, a horde of them, relevant for later. But, like, the combat, like, it's not great combat. It's just, you got this real floppy sword that sort of catches on enemies in that awkward 90s video game type of way. And I don't know why they would put stuff in there that, like, encourages you to really engage in combat at all. Yeah.
Well, it has to do with the different behaviors of the AI, right? So the human AI will try to, or the guard AI will try to, like, defend you but call for help. The servants will try to run and find someone, and the monsters just rush you. So in some sense that makes sense, but I totally hear what you're saying of, why would you encourage combat in a game that's not about that?
Yeah.
I guess the idea being you really want to sneak past those guys, but also, I don't know how easy that is.
There's a lot of, like, I feel like the reason why you don't get a lot of stealth games is it's hard, right? Because, like, and one of the hardest questions I feel like when it comes with stealth is, like, are you just automatically dead if somebody sees you? Is there some sort of combat system? Like, if you make the combat system too good, then, like, people aren't encouraged to do the stealth part. But if you make it too unforgiving when you're caught, then that just makes for a frustrating experience, right? So that's an interesting sort of design question.
Definitely. But I feel like now, I mean, obviously Thief is 20 years old, right? But I feel like now we finally have the technology for these games to be sort of viable. Like, I've found trying to do any kind of stealth in Assassin's Creed, which, again, we're a decade back in time there, but still, I found that to be very frustrating. Mostly because I just don't feel like the game is sophisticated enough to let me plan the kind of awesome assassinations that I want to do, and I'm sure I talked about this on last week's side quest, so forgive me for being a little repetitive here. Like, I get that, like, stealth is not only hard to find the fun balance, but must also be hard to actually create the system for.
Mm-hmm.
But it does surprise me that there aren't more games that have really attempted that as a main feature. Because it does feel like it's included as a sub-feature in so many games that it just surprises me that it hasn't caught on as a more, like a mainstream genre. Wikipedia called this, by the way, and I'm pretty sure these are fake Wikipedia terms that somebody put in there thinking they were really funny, but I thought they were funny, so whatever. They call it a first-person sneaker, or a sneak 'em up.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure no one has ever used those terms before. But
we should make it catch on.
There's some Wikipedia editor somewhere who is really, really proud of themselves for coming up with that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm proud of them too.
Yeah. Me too. I'm proud of you, Wikipedia editor. You did it.
Anyway, there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in the way this game is designed that was really groundbreaking for the time. Although, once again, in sort of the theme of the podcast this past month or so, it's amazing how much these things have become just such a normal part of games that you don't even think about somebody had to do this for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
This is really the first game where light and sound were, like, gameplay mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, this has a light gauge as part of your interface. It's telling you how much in the shadow and how much in the light you are, which is super cool and also, like, crazy that was something that was invented 20 years ago, right? Like, but it also has sound effects that not only sort of give you the heads up of what's going on, but basically it sounded to me, the way I understood how the AI worked from reading about it, is that it's really based on sound cues. So when the AI, like, hears an unscripted sound, that's what tips them off to you.
Yeah. It's like, it depends on the type of, like, material you're walking on, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, different kinds of floors are louder or quieter when you step on them, for instance.
Yeah. But it's wild to think, and especially given next week's podcast being about gameplay mechanics and the ways that they're used to affect player experience. It's wild to think about. Like, it's hard for me now, probably because I'm not very creative, to think of, like, what's a new mechanic you could use in a game, right? Like, what's something new that somebody hasn't done before, right? But to think, like, 20 years ago that was light and sound is crazy. That was, like, an innovation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, Wikipedia also told me that it was one of the first video games to be, like, morally ambiguous, which felt a little like, okay, sure, to me.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you are a thief, I guess.
Well, it was basically making the argument that you sort of get to choose how brutal you want to be. Like,
oh, yeah.
Like, do you want to sort of slaughter everyone as you go? Or do you want to try to sneak past?
That has to do a little bit, it has sort of an interesting difficulty setting.
Yeah.
In that it gives you more difficult, like, objectives in your missions, as opposed to just, like, I don't know, making the AI more or less observant, I guess, would be, like, the standard way to do a difficulty on a stealth game. But that just seems like it would get real frustrating or real, like, funny, like, on easy difficulties if you were, like, just walking behind them and they didn't notice you, or on hard difficulties if you moved and they were like, oh my god, it's a thief.
That'd be a fun gag difficulty level. Invisible.
Yeah. But I thought that was, like, an interesting difficulty mechanic. I don't know. I'm always, like, I don't think, I guess it's not really content, right? Like, you're not missing out on content because you don't pick a difficulty level, but it's brushing dangerously close to there for me, which I don't feel like is the right way to do a difficulty thing. Like, there shouldn't be more or less stuff depending on difficulty.
Well, but there's no reason on normal difficulty that you can't yourself try to do it without killing anyone, or...
Yeah. It's not just that. Like, there's a whole bunch of different objectives you can add or subtract. So it is very dynamic in that way. It's just an interesting dilemma posing.
Well, I think it's also interesting in that it sort of restricts the kind of gameplay style that you can use. I mean, obviously, in the case of a stealth game, I don't think that's necessarily a wrong thing for developers to do, to try to steer even objectives that are being used to increase or decrease difficulty, right? To steer those toward, prioritizing using the stealth mechanic as opposed to fighting, right? But, you don't have, you can fight, right? And in this game that is relatively open in what you can do in the missions themselves, right? There's not necessarily a set path or a set way you have to do it. It's interesting that their difficulty level kind of forces you to play the game the way they maybe want you to play it. I think it's kind of a cool way to increase difficulty, although I don't know how it would work in practice. It might be a little bit frustrating if you've been playing on normal and sort of playing it with that kind of emergent narrative for yourself of like, Garrett is a Janist and doesn't want to kill people, right? Or even creatures. And then to be like, okay, I want it to be harder, and the harder level is you don't kill anything. But, I think both of us here at Talk This are always in favor of creative difficulty mechanics. So
yeah.
It's interesting to see that even in 1998, they were trying to find a way to change difficulty up that wasn't just there's fewer dark patches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you are louder by default.
Yeah. Those would be silly difficulty measures.
Yeah. So, I do want to also throw out there, in sort of that world of our abandoned Watch This series, not that it's abandoned, it's just spun off into split screen for the time being, that there is a Thief film sort of in the works somewhere. Somebody has the rights to it. I mean, it's not like actively in the works, but somebody does have the rights to it. And I just thought it was funny. So the producer of Hitman, he went on the record saying that he wanted to create a shared Square Enix universe of films with like Just Cause and Hitman and Tomb Raider and Deus Ex and Thief. Which, like, what?
I mean, like, whatever. I would go see it. I would go see the Squeenix Avengers, but just Agent 47 in his flamingo costume, and everybody else is that they're their selves.
So just wait, coming to a theater near you.
Hitman is what I would say is like the only other stealth game I can think of. And even that's like fundamentally different than this original Thief.
Well, I hope stealth games... Well, I'm not really very good at them. Or I'm not very good at the stealth in Assassin's Creed, which I want to believe is because it's not good.
Yeah.
But I would be interested in playing stealth games. I'm always interested in more games coming out that aren't shooters that I'm bad at.
Well, I've heard Hitman is fun. I don't know if I would go all the way back to Thief the Dark Project. I don't know if it's available.
Well, they do have the 2014 reboot that is not the same.
I've heard, apparently it's very mixed reactions to the reboot.
Well, forget it then. I have plenty of games to play. Speaking of games that I could play, since I own a PS4 now, let's talk about Days Gone.
So, Days Gone is a action-adventure survival horror video game. Stop me if you've heard this before.
Seriously.
By Bend Studio, which is owned, of course, by Sony Interactive Entertainment. So it is the latest PlayStation 4 exclusive, and unfortunately, I would not say the greatest Sony Interactive Entertainment.
Not the latest and greatest?
Production. Just the latest.
That...
The latest and the somethingist. Bikerist.
Anyway, it was released, like, yesterday, by which I mean in April.
It was not released yesterday.
I mean, it feels like it was released yesterday.
Uh-huh.
But it was released in April. It's set, because it's developed by Bend Studios, right, which is out of Bend, Oregon.
Yeah.
It's their first console release since 2004, by the way. So, don't look for another one from them soon, probably, but...
Well, when did they get purchased by PlayStation? Because that
No, I know. They've been what I'm saying is they've been making, like, handheld type games for a while in the meantime for Sony. And now they get to make this game. And you know what? Hey, I think it sold pretty well.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it did.
Anyway, it's set in post-apocalyptic Oregon, because it's Bend, Oregon. 2 years after a global pandemic that turned everyone into not zombies.
Freakers.
No, not zombies. Emma, what are they called?
I didn't say zombies. I said freakers.
Well, I was finishing my sentence.
We're not allowed to say zombies anymore, okay?
I was finishing my sentence and you jumped in with freaker while I was making a joke and you stepped on my punchline.
We don't say the Z word anymore. You know what? I always feel like with these games, and like whatever, I roll with it. But with any zombie game where they're like, give it a different name, it's like somebody's calling them zombies.
Well, it's just
like it doesn't matter if the government like officially branded them with this name. In fact, it's more realistic if the government like officially branded them with some weird name, but everybody else is like, it's just zombies.
Well,
you know?
Do all of these games take place in an apocalyptic universe where all the zombie media just like doesn't exist?
Apparently.
That feels like the only justification.
The Walking Dead, they're walkers. The Last of Us, I can't remember what they're called. I think they just call them infected, which at least is, like, accurate. It's not just, like, a weird nickname they came up for with them.
Unless all of these games take place in universes, and this probably makes sense for a number of reasons, right? But unless all of these games take place in universes where there's just no, zombies were not a concept, there's no way that anyone would call any of these things anything but zombies.
Mm-hmm.
But also, maybe that makes sense, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. These are presumably set in the real world, but whatever. Because if there was zombie media, presumably people would better know how to handle this than they do.
I don't know if that's true.
Oh, come on. If they played every single action-adventure survival horror game, wouldn't they have a better idea of how to approach this? Or how not to approach it, at least?
No.
Maybe not. Okay, fine.
But anyway, Days Gone stars... Sorry, his name is just so funny to me. But it stars Deacon St. John. How many Bible references can we cram in this name?
Did you see in the Kotaku review, their, like, back cover quote was like, you'll feel better about your name after people call you Deke for 30 hours.
No, I didn't see that. But it's very true. But it starts out with you and your buddy...
Boozer,
which also stellar name. Are, fleeing the zombies. I'm sorry, the freakers. And you go to, like, a helicopter that's taking people out because your wife, Sarah, has been stabbed. But, oh gosh, the helicopter could only fit 2 more people.
Does not make sense.
I know. But you decide to put Sarah on and stay behind with Boozer. But then you see, like, the helicopter, like, exploding, and you think she's dead. But she might not be.
Yeah. So,
and a lot of it is just you trying to survive. You're a man with a code. That's not really much of a code, in my impression. But...
Yeah, so you and Boozer have become, like, bounty hunters, basically, right? And you're riding around in your motorcycle and servicing your motorcycle as you see fit in the open world environment that has become expected in AAA PS4 exclusives.
Mm-hmm. Well, the motorcycle is different.
Don't they have motorcycles in Final Fantasy? Isn't that a thing?
They have a car. But the car was different, too.
Does he not ride a motorcycle at some point?
In Final Fantasy 15? No, he does not ride a motorcycle.
Never mind.
He has a car.
Never mind, then.
But the car was also pretty different in Final Fantasy 15. So, being the second one to have your dedicated vehicle is, not bad. So, yeah, it has, like, 2 unique things going for it. One being the bike, which is... and the other one being... just moving on from impressions. But the other one being hordes, which basically... They can put a whole lot of zombies on screen. I'm sorry, freakers. They can put a whole lot of freakers on screen without any sort of drop in quality. So it's certainly...
Technically
a technical
impressive.
feat. Yeah. Reviews, however, have told me that the bike can get more annoying than it is, like,
Novel
personal.
and fun.
Yeah. And the hordes don't show up until pretty late in the game, and they can range from being incredibly fun to take down to incredibly frustrating and boring. So a bit of a mixed bag, essentially. It's a very okay game, has been the impression I've gotten from it, which is fine.
Most of the reviews seem to have taken the tact of saying, look, like, this game is a video game, right?
Yeah.
It's, if you were going to crank out sort of like a video game that captures what video games are right now, right, at like a big studio, right, this would be the game, right? It's got the open world, it's got the crafting, you've got all these quests, you've got, the motorcycle's a little unique, right, but you've got this, like, anti-hero guy at the center, and people get weird about this, but, like, there's a big twist, right? I'm not going to say what the twist is, 'cause it's a pretty new game here, but, like, there's a big twist. Maybe that's enough for you to guess what the twist is. But there's a big twist, so it's, deep and interesting. So a lot of the reviews have sort of taken the tact of being like, okay, so, like, we've seen this before, it doesn't really do anything new with this. In fact, it sort of gets stuck in these genre tropes. Which, to me, is a useful review, right? Because, let's be honest, if you're interested in this type of game at all, right, you've played at least some of The Last of Us. I mean, dear God, I have played some of The Last of Us, right? So, like, the bar is pretty low here, and I am sort of familiar with how that game sort of ran, at least the first few hours of it, and knowing that, I could understand, like, oh, this game is sort of like that, right? And if I liked that a lot, maybe I will like this. I'm looking for something exactly the same. But, I don't know, the comment sections I was reading were kind of like, tell me about the game! Don't just, like, critique the genre. It's like, I
feel like I read some reviews and I saw those comments and I was like, they did tell you about the game.
I know.
They told you what they did, their experience with everything, and then they also tied it into the fact that it's just like a big hodgepodge of everything you've probably seen before.
Yeah.
And I feel like that tells you enough to sort of make your judgment on whether you want to spend time with it.
And I just feel like you don't get those kinds of comments on pretty much any other form of media. Like, if I wrote a movie review and I said, this romantic comedy is pretty formulaic and it's like any other romantic comedy you've seen before, no one would write and be like, tell me about the movie. Which, may be a function of, obviously, games are somewhat more complex in the kinds of things that you can review, or maybe a function of the fact that I picked the romantic comedy, which is primarily a genre aimed at women and, considered to be kind of low art.
Something I do think is challenging as more and more games become open world is writing a review of an open world game.
Yeah.
Because the more stuff and the more freedom the games gives you, the more you're going to play it your way and have your own experience. And even if you write about that, that might be, like, somebody else might have an entirely different experience with it. And of course that's true of all media, right? Like, our personal experiences feed into how we read things, and things we've seen and played and whatever before feed into that too. But, like, in this, like, you could play, like, 60 hours of Red Dead Redemption 2 and not touch everything in the game, right? It's just interesting in that way.
Well, it forces you to do reviews like, sort of like these ones, where you have to talk more about the genre and the big picture. But I get that in open world games it becomes difficult to review any kind of a narrative, right? And in that way it does become much more subjective in terms of what kind of game that you like, I think. But you can, I think you can just as well as any other game review the mechanics and the things you can do, because even in these giant games, there are only so many different ways you can do things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that part, the part that all these people in the comments were whining for more of, even though it was there, is just as easily reviewed. But it does sort of have to come more through a lens or a writing style of your personal experience than if you're playing through a more narratively plotted game. Because in that case, you can sort of take refuge in, while everyone is going to have a different gameplay strategy or whatever, everyone is at least going to experience more or less the same arc of the game. So you get to sort of take that more objective stance. It would feel really fake to try to review an open world game without including your personal perspective in some way. Which I think is where people start to take issue, because it starts to feel like, well, if the writer doesn't like this, why don't they play a different game?
Yeah.
Which, like, is so silly. It's like they're getting paid to, like, this is their job, dude.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just because they write a bad review. Like, sometimes they get assigned games that are not what they would play at. Like, chill out, buddy.
Yeah.
But also, it's just, I feel like that's the only honest way you can write these reviews, is taking into account your personal experience. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah, just to quote Kotaku's podcast, where they talked about this recently, the title of the article about it was, Days Gone is certainly a video game. So, there you have it, from another podcast's mouth.
That's how I feel about it, too.
It's also really buggy, apparently, despite numerous patches, as we talked about at the beginning of the episode a little bit. As of, like a week and a half out from its release, it's had like 8 or 9 patches so far.
At least they're on top of it.
No, I mean, kudos to them. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But there do seem to be, even in just reading reviews, people are being like, a puddle swallowed me up one time.
I saw.
Or... Like,
I watched Jim Sterling's video review of it, and there were a lot of, like, floating heads. Like, characters' heads would just be, like, disembodied and floating sometimes.
Yeah. And I was reading an article on Kotaku about how Deacon just, like, talks all the time, right? It's annoying.
See, actually, and I thought this was an interesting take, like, I was watching Jim Sterling's review, and he was like, the Deacon in the gameplay is a way more interesting, different kind of character than the one in the cutscenes. Like, he's just a crazy survivalist who's always muttering to himself. Versus, like, cutscene Deacon is like, I have a code, I don't kill unarmed women. It's like, well, one, great code. Like, you're really setting the bar high there. But, like, and I kind of see that viewpoint. Like, there's so much, like, a man with a code type thing, and feels more like something, and I hate being like, oh, it's more realistic. I hate that criticism. But it feels like something less story-like to just have the dude just be like a crazy survivalist who talks to himself to keep himself company, because the freaker apocalypse has been going on for, like 2 years.
What are they called in Borderlands? I don't know why this is...
Psychos?
Yeah, it would be fun to... Like, you are the psycho.
Yeah, he's not quite like that.
I know he's not, but, I mean, sort of branching off what you were saying there, I was also reading in the comments section, people had these good points that, like, in the event of an actual zombie apocalypse, right?
Freaker.
I'm sorry. Well, whatever. In the event of a actual freaker apocalypse, or, whatever you want to call them, walking zombie-like things in any of these games, the people that survive are not the people that are alone, right? It's, like, the one sole guy. It's the people that get together with a couple dozen people and have a plan, even if they're not as well equipped.
Yeah.
And also the interesting point that, like, all of these games are, like, humanity has been reduced to, like, 90% of humanity has been killed, right? And you know what? That puts us back to population levels in 1750, where we all did just fine.
Yeah.
So, this idea of, like, he's totally alone, the population would have to be, much, 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 much less than sometimes it's described.
Well, Deke
Deke.
Well, Deke does, in the first part of the game, go between, like, 2 different settlements, doing jobs for them. And later in the game, there's a 3rd settlement that is also introduced. So it's not as if he's just, like, a lone wolf in it throughout the whole thing. Like, he's staying by himself, but he does, like, you know, go and stay places and do jobs for people, right? So it's not entirely, like, he's just very, like, loner-y. He's not, like, fully alone. Like, he's not like Bill in The Last of Us, for instance.
No, you're right. Why would they make this when The Last of Us already exists?
That's what I kind of wonder. Yeah.
I mean, I understand why they made this, because The Last of Us exists. And everybody likes it.
It's just interesting because it's also a Sony title, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's also a PlayStation exclusive. So it feels like they're just, I don't know, maybe they're like, people who own PlayStations like this sort of game. And maybe that's true. But it feels like they're overlapping their player base. Although I guess there's going to be enough buffer between this one and The Last of Us 2, which I imagine will come out, like, next year at some point.
The more we have to talk about these kinds of AAA open world games, the more that I really reinforce in my life that I prefer games where someone is telling me a story.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the external motivation to seek things out just for the sake of seeking them a lot of the time.
For me, I don't mind sort of an open space as long as it's small enough that I can navigate it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mind, like, cities that you can run around or, like, small areas you can run around as long as, like, everything's, like, clearly segmented from each other and, like, you can find things, right?
It's not so much that I have a problem with the giant open world or the open world structure of you can sort of do things in order, or in whatever order you want.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that on the face of it in terms of, like, my personal gameplay preferences. This is all personal, by the way. Like, of course these games are great. This is just me talking about what I like to play. Just that personal bias out there. But I need a reason to be doing the quests. I'm very reward-oriented. If I'm not going to get rewards for doing my quests or for fighting the enemies or whatever, and I know this has a skill tree, which maybe would be enough for me, but in the games that are, like, really open, it's just like, do what you want. It's like, this is not enough motivation for me to do this. Where's the payoff here?
Yeah. I feel like having looked at it and looked at some of the side quests in Days Gone, like, something about the apocalyptic setting makes it feel really inauthentic when things you do have, like, no impact on, like, the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, like, in Days Gone, for instance, there's a lot of, like, the standard, like, you go to a bandit camp and wipe out the bandits, or whatever. But, like, I feel like in an apocalyptic society, that would have, like, a profound impact on, like, the way the world works if you wiped out a bandit camp. Like, how many freaking bandit camps can there be at this point? You know?
Seriously.
Or you'd think that there'd be, like, some sort of bandit hierarchy, at least.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Like, I don't think there would just be, like, roaming disparate bands. I think at some point they would have had some sort of society of sorts. But, like, you just go, you kill the dudes, and then you collect your money, and it's done. And it just doesn't feel... Apparently there's some stuff that has to do with, like, the science-y stuff of the Freakers that seems slightly more interesting than the standard bandit camp type thing. But still. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
Like, if you're just doing side quests in a normal world, it doesn't feel as silly when nothing happens because of it, beyond, like, some side characters you'll never see again or something.
Yeah.
You know? But when it's like there's already a limited amount of humans in this area, it feels a little bit like well, I just killed another 20 humans.
Yeah. No, seriously.
What does that do?
But hey, at least the Pacific Northwest is pretty.
You know what? That's totally fair.
So how shall we mash up these two games? Feels like something not called zombies is a common thread.
You're a stealth guy on your stealth bike. I want a stealth bike.
Okay. The bat cycle.
Yeah. Like a bat cycle, yeah.
Alright, so we've got a stealth bike. This is already weird. But
it's very important to me. The stealth bike is really important to me, Mel.
Great. That's fine. I can roll with it, literally. Stealth bike. You're in an open world. You're a thief. The not zombies roam the land. And you're looting from people stealthily with the goal of finding something specific.
What's our zombie horde called? I guess in true thief naming fashion, they should probably just be called the zombies.
No. We can't use that word.
The undead.
Boring.
But that's the point. That's true thief naming fashion.
I know, but like
the undead of the city.
The not living.
The not living. Yes, let's make it totally a mouthful for no particular
Or the
reason.
unliving, which is usually the undead, but how about it's the unliving? That's also true.
There you go. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the unliving have taken over the world. You're in, like, Venice or something. You have to be in some place that feels like neato. Steampunk, right?
Feels neato steampunk, yeah. Okay.
So there's a bunch of neato steampunk cities that you can, like, use your stealth bike to go between.
Okay.
And when you get to the cities, you have to put away your stealth bike. Sad. Like, you'll do, like, an escape out of the city on your stealth bike, so don't worry.
Okay.
But you get to each city with the goal of stealing, I don't know, like, what's the big item that we're going to put together? Like, stealing something for a vaccine.
The valuable. The medicine.
Yeah, the medicine. But the way you do that is, like, let's make this, like, weird and scary, right? I don't know. I just feel like I need something interesting here. It's like you have to steal, like, blood or bodily fluids or something. Like, you're really making a vaccine.
Like, from people?
Like, from specific people.
So you're also a vampire.
No, like with syringes. This is sterile.
Okay. Good. I was worried.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're the syringe thief man on your stealth bike.
You're like the doctor.
The doctor.
Or rather, you're Dr. Saint Health. Or something.
See, I feel like we're losing the stealth bike here. We're not capitalizing on the stealth bike.
The stealth bike is the only thing that allows you to get the samples to your laboratory in time.
Okay.
But you have to, like, sneak. You know, you have to, going through the countryside, there are roaming patrols of, what do we call them? The unliving. But this doesn't really have a combat mechanic unless, like, the stealth bike can kind of, like, wipe things out. But if you get knocked off the bike, like, you just have to get back to the bike. Right? And if you run out of fuel, like, you effed.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts, feelings?
It's interesting. It's interesting, for sure.
You also have to rip out your own eye to complete the vaccine.
No. And your name is Pastor St. Matthew.
Nice.
Dr. Pastor St. Matthew.
You're also looking for your dog. This is what makes you a sympathetic character.
You're looking for your dog?
Yeah.
Your dog was stabbed and you put it on the rescue helicopter because they only had room for one dog and no Dr. Pastor St. Matthew. But then you saw the helicopter explode and you were worried your dog was gone.
No. Better, more heart-wrenching story that also adds some moral ambiguity. You had to, like, as the horde was closing in, you had to escape on your stealth bike, but, like, you didn't have your dog sidecar ready. Like, it wasn't attached, and it was going to take too long to attach.
Oh my gosh.
So you had to leave your dog behind.
I can't believe we left our stealth dog sidecar behind.
But it's okay. About 2/3 of the way through the game, you find that your dog is now the leader of a pack of brave and valiant good boys.
On bikes.
They've had a different mutation that allows them to talk, and your dog tells you that it forgives you, and that it understands. And that, well, it would not have done the same thing, it still loves you.
Reviews will be like, an interesting concept, but about 10 hours in, it starts to really go off the rails.
No, everyone will say, yeah, it's pretty standard up until about 10 hours in, like the blood thing was weird. Oh, and then you can use, the dogs are called the Bloodhounds, and they assist you. The game is called Bloodhound.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have a bestseller.
It's like, you know, everyone who wants
I
this.
buy it.
It's for everyone who thought Watch Dogs was about dogs.
Oh no.
We'll take it and we'll say, you know how everyone wants a Nintendogs remake? We got the adult and gritty version of that for you.
Nowadays, every childhood property is going dark and gritty. But you know what hasn't yet? Nintendogs. Here's our pitch.
No, and then in addition...
Please stop walking out of the room. Please come back.
Once you reunite with your dog, you not only can you, like, you know, it's not that fun to, like, customize your stealth bike, right? Because it's mostly invisible. But you can, like, groom your dog, dress him up.
That is the best part of Tales of Vesperia, so it's fact that dressing your dog up makes the game better.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Proven. Play tested.
And that's how we'll get our microtransaction money.
It's foolproof. In the end, you realize...
That's how we get them back into the room.
In the end, you realize you were a dog the whole time.
That, Madelyn, you ruined the twist.
Shoot. No, that wouldn't work. In the end, the dogs take the Iron Throne.
It's like the end of Planet of the Apes, only dogs.
What?
It's like the end of Planet of the Apes, only dogs.
I'm confused. He realizes it's Earth.
Yeah.
But he knew it was
You realize... I don't know. You realize that you're the only human left, that everyone else is dogs.
Dang. What a lucky dude.
I know. It's a happy ending.
We'll come up with a great twist later, but we'll release it in early access. It's fine.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's great. Bloodhounds coming to the PlayStation 5 2020.
It's got a catchy freaking title. Isn't that
It does. Bloodhounds is pretty catchy.
And it captures what the game is about.
Okay. Why don't you capture what our podcast is about and give them the rundown.
So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous podcast.
This is the second week in a row you've bobbled that.
You know what? I'm trying to set up the game pickers. Are you doing anything right now? No, you're doing nothing.
Well, thanks for tuning in. And, no. It's been another wild ride here on the podcast this week. Thanks for tuning in to our obviously probably very dated discussion of Days Gone. Who knows? Maybe they've renamed Deacon in the past few weeks.
Deke!
Just straight up Deke. We're not sure. We're busy on our vacation in Japan. But hey, while we're away, you should catch up on all the Talk This media. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast, where we've no doubt been posting various content from the archives of the blog, as well as various video game related things that we've seen in Japan. So you definitely don't want to miss it. And also on YouTube at Talk This Sisters, where you can see Emma's long-running now Play This series about gameplay mechanics as storytelling, in addition to various other content, so definitely subscribe to that. Speaking of subscribing, you should subscribe to the show. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and Pandora Podcasts on the app. So subscribe to us so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a rating and a review? If you want even more Talk This Podcast content, you should check us out on www.talkthispodcast.com. There you can read more about the show, see the games that are in the hat, drop us a line on our contact page, or read content on our blog, which I mentioned in the social media section a little bit, but that blog includes series Clickbait Boyfriend, where my boyfriend is playing through the Kingdom Hearts series. He's on Kingdom Hearts 3 now. I mean, he's finished in real life, but my blogs are on Kingdom Hearts 3. And Split Screen, where Emma and I are closing in on the end of Boys Over Flowers, and sort of on My Hero Academia too, right? So,
Sort of.
I mean, not quite, but relative to where we were when we started.
Fair enough.
Plus various other blog content, so definitely check that out. So without waiting any longer, I'm out of content to plug. So Emma, what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks?
Well, for our old game, we'll be talking about Spore.
Oh, one I've actually played.
And for our new game, we shall be talking about Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, that's going to be a fascinating mashup.
Yeah. Oh no.
It's a 300-hour game.
Oh no.
You raise a protozoa to a rootin' tootin' cowboy
God,
cleat.
just stop now. Anyway, that's been our episode. Look forward to that in 2 weeks. Next week we have sort of a reading of our game presentation.
It's more exciting than that just made it sound.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I promise. It'll be interesting. So until next time, I hope that you have weaker.